The average cost to build a home in today's economy is $305,829, which for many Americans, especially young adults, is way out of reach. Which means you have to get creative, and one of those options is to build a tiny house. Tiny houses can range from 60 to 400 square feet, meaning that they're 1/5 of the size of an actual house, which typically starts at 1,000 square feet and can just go up from there. But there's one caveat to that. Tiny houses still have everything that you would have in a regular house, like a couch, a stove, flooring, etc. So today we're going to be adding up everything I spent to build this house back in 2020 to see how much we actually spent to build our dream home. The first stop is the trailer, which is obviously the most important and also the most expensive part of your tiny house build. We decided to go with a 20-foot by 8-foot or 105 inches, which is the max you can go in with, so you don't have to get a permit to drive it around, with 14,000-pound axles on either side to make sure it was sturdy enough to hold up everything that we would put inside. And we got our trailer from Am Trailers here in DeLand, Florida, and we ended up spending around $4,100 total. Mind you, this was back in 2020, so prices might have changed by now. Next are the doors and windows for the house, and I decided to buy these first to build the tiny house around the actual doors and windows, so I wouldn't have to buy any custom order windows or spend a fortune on them because they can get very expensive. We got most of our doors and windows from either a flea market, Facebook Marketplace, or local supply store that are a lot more affordable, so we were able to save a fortune being able to build the actual structure around the windows that I found for a really good price. And specifically for the back of the tiny house, which is where I'm filming right now, I wanted a really large window so that way we could get a lot of natural light in here, and unfortunately for me, a 90-inch window was going to be way out of the budget, so I decided to put double glass doors instead, and it came out so much cheaper. We literally got them for free off of Facebook Marketplace, plus they act as a second exit, which I think is awesome. It's so safe, and we plan on building a deck out here that wasn't initially in the plans, but it kind of worked out. And in total, for 5 windows and 2 doors, one of them being the sliding glass door that we got for free, we came out to a total of around $950 for everything, which if you ask me, the custom window that we were going to get for the back was just that price alone. But we ended up spending a total of almost $2,000 in all of the materials to actually build the structure and frame out the windows and doors. And since we knew we were going to be spending a lot of money on building this whole thing out, I decided to open up a Lowe's card. That way we would get 5% back on all purchases. No, this is not sponsored, but I do think it does help at the end of the day when you're adding up everything. Next off, we have the siding and the metal roof. We decided to go metal for everything because it was a lot cheaper than doing shiplap. Plus, I feel like it would be a lot more durable during the Florida hurricanes. And one huge sheet of metal roofing was a lot more affordable compared to the other wood options that we had. Now, we did have to special order the one for the roof because I didn't want to have any seams up there. I feel like it was just going to make something leak, and I didn't want that to happen. It ended up leaking anyways, but we did buy a huge 20-foot piece, which ended up being actually too short, but that one was a little bit more expensive than the other stock items, but it wasn't by much. And with all of the metal siding plus the trims that come with it, we spent a total of roughly $1,300, which is fairly low compared to if we were to do the whole building in shiplap or some wood alternative. Now, this is one of the parts of the build that I actually regret not having spent a little bit more money, which is the insulation. We decided to get a regular old R11 insulation, the kind that you just staple into place. And although it was somewhat easy to install, not as easy as the spray foam, which is a really popular option, but it is almost like 3 times the price. I do wish we would have gone with an in-between option, like a higher rating for the insulation rather than doing the cheapest option that was out there, because let's just say when it reaches summertime here in Florida, it gets a little bit hot in here. The next thing that we had to worry about for the tiny house is doing the rough plumbing for everything, and to save a little bit of trouble and also a little bit of money, we decided to keep most of the water slash sink slash toilet all on the back end of the house. That way we wouldn't have to stretch any pipes all the way back to the front. And we ended up spending a total of almost $600 for all of the rough plumbing for the house. Next up are the toilets, the sinks, and all of these other things that go with the plumbing. We did buy these separately, most of them from Amazon, because they were either A, better quality, and B, very affordable. And also they had a lot of custom sizing that you couldn't find at Lowe's or Home Depot, which our toilet actually, which has a smaller bowl than normal just to make it fit a little better in the space and also not be so tight in there. And so for most of those items, we ended up spending a total of about $320. And if you guys want any of the links of the stuff that we use in our tiny house that's from Amazon, you can check out the link in the description to find them. On the topic of having this place have functioning water, we did make a mistake when buying our water heater. We ended up going with the tankless at first, which we thought was the right idea because they are very compact and they heat up the water instantly. And we ended up spending a total of $250, give or take, on a Rheem water heater. And as soon as we put it in place, we noticed that it needed a 60 amp amp breaker, which if you don't know is absolutely ridiculous. It is so much power, so much energy, and the fact that we later had to switch this whole thing up into a 30 amp, that just was not gonna fly, and it would fry some wires. So make sure you learn from my mistakes and just buy a tank and find somewhere to put it. They're not that much more. We ended up spending an additional $450 to buy the actual tank version of it, but it has about 15 gallons, which I've noticed is enough for me to take a shower, my husband to take a shower, and the water is still coming out warm at the end of it. And again, if you guys want a recommendation of the one that we used, I'll have it linked in the description for you guys, and also you guys can see where we put it. We had to get very creative because it is very large, so we decided to add in a little water closet in the bathroom, and thankfully it worked out fine. Now obviously, to make all of this work, we need some energy in here, which means we had to do the electrical next. And one key thing to note here is that we did buy an outside panel box, that way it would be out of the way and we could conserve some of the space on the inside, which ended up being a little more expensive. It was $215 for that, but I will say it is definitely worth it, and it is in a very easy access spot, so in case we have any issues, we can just easily jump outside and turn it off and it's out of the way. Now that we're getting more into the design aspect of the tiny house, a lot of these items I try to find either used, recycled, or donated by someone, because this is where it starts to get a little expensive, unfortunately. But thankfully we had a lot of help from other people that were able to donate, gift, or we were able to purchase at a really good price. And one of those is the flooring. Now my parents do own a flooring company, but I wanted this really specific flooring that unfortunately we didn't have any stock of, so I ended up purchasing it, obviously for a pretty good discount, but it still ended up being around $500. And the flooring that we used for the loft, just to save a little bit, we ended up getting some donated boxes. Now in a tiny house, if you haven't noticed, almost nobody uses drywall, and obviously because it is on wheels, you don't want to drive around and have the drywall crack on you, so a lot of people opt for a shiplap version, which when I saw the pricing on that when I was 18 years old shopping with this much money, jaw on the floor. Shiplap to me is just so expensive, so we found an alternative instead, which are these super thin plywood boards. We ended up buying them, I believe, at Home Depot, and they're really malleable. They're super easy to work with. It is a little harder because you have to cut a gigantic piece right to size, and if you have windows you have to cut it out, but I will say it was definitely a lot easier, I think, than dealing with smaller pieces and having to staple every single individual piece, whereas we worked with huge panels and just kind of slap them on the wall and you're done. And then for the seams, we ended up buying some trim to kind of close them off, but I realized that it made it look a little cheap looking, so I just decided to get some drywall putty and some caulking and fill in the gaps instead. And as you can see behind me, or maybe not because it was actually a quite good idea, there is a seam there. You can see it if you look closely, but I think it came out pretty well. And for this part of the project, we ended up spending a total of around $400 to do the whole entire interior. And now we're getting into my favorite part, which I think is what sets my tiny house apart from a lot of other people's, because I haven't seen anything quite similar to this, and that is the closet system that I designed myself to fit all of my clothes. Didn't end up being all of it, but the vast majority of it did fit in there, and the whole thing was basically engineered by me. It doesn't work perfectly, but it was basically just a bunch of slabs of plywood put together. However, once I was done building it, the section where there were little drawers going on, they did not work properly. They were not soft closed. They were honestly horrible, and I hated it. And so I figured I would splurge just a little bit, and so I went out and bought a little IKEA kitchen cabinet thing that I thought would work perfectly there. And we actually cut one of the steps in half so we would have a vanity section, and the idea worked out brilliantly because that's usually where I film most of my other videos. But again, I think this was one of those learning curve things where we did it one way once, it didn't work, and then I had to go back and purchase more materials to do it a second time. I definitely don't regret it though, and it wasn't a huge cost because the closet itself the first time around was about $600 in materials, which we ended up using the vast majority of it. And then I went back on Facebook Marketplace and found that IKEA cabinet for $150 with all of the drawers and shelves in it too. Now, as a somewhat experienced home remodeler / investor, the most expensive part of a house that has to do with the design is the kitchen cabinets. And the granite too. If you sum it all up, it's one of the biggest costs that you could have in a house. And this is where I got a little nervous, but of course, as you guys know me, I would not buy this at a big box store and pay full price. So I decided to go to a local kitchen company and see if they had ripped anything out of someone's house that maybe happened to be in a black color, which is super rare actually, but clearly you can see that it worked out. And they decided to just sell it to me for $300 flat for every piece that they had, and it ended up fitting perfectly in our kitchen. I did have to modify one cabinet, but it did work out pretty well. But honestly, for $300, and they're soft close and they came with all the accessories and the bells and whistles, I would have 100% done it again. Now, the next item is one thing that I was petrified of buying because I knew it was going to be one of the most expensive, and that is the mini split unit AC. We ended up having to get one that's 125 volts because we are on a a 30 amp breaker, so we can't have too much energy going to it. And we also got a 9000 BTU, which is one of the lower ones, but because we have such a small space, it cools so well. And if you didn't know, a typical mini split plus the installation, which you need special tools and things for, is roughly $4,000. And I could not fathom, because that was 1/3 of the price of the total tiny house. So I decided to buy one at Lowe's for, I think it was $700 honestly, and it was at a discount. And I also decided to learn how to DIY install it myself, which ended up kind of going south, but I did meet a good friend out of it because he owns a AC company, and so he did me a solid, and he literally charged me like $300 just to like charge the lines and to make sure that it was working properly, but I had already hung up all the units. So for me, that was kind of a win, but in total it ended up being about $1,000, which if you ask me is still a lot better than $400, but it is still very expensive. Now that we're done with the build, obviously we have to live in the tiny house, so we needed to buy all of our appliances. And again, my best friend, Facebook Marketplace, we ended up buying a lot of stuff used or at a discount on sale, because we did move in sort of like Black Friday time, which thankfully we got advantage of a lot of the good things. So if you guys want to see what appliances we actually purchased for our tiny house, we actually just got a new fridge, which has a bottom freezer and a top fridge, which I will have all of the items that we purchased in terms of appliances also linked down below, because I know how hard it is to find a slim but somehow tall fridge and a microwave that also serves as an air fryer and also a convection oven, which is great for space saving, but again, doesn't work that well. And also our stove top, which is probably one of my favorite things in the tiny house because it works so well for what it is, and it's also 125 volts, which is so rare to find. So just a quick rundown, our fridge we bought on Facebook Marketplace. The first one, it was $400, and then we have the microwave, which we bought on a discount, and it's $180, plus our little stove top, which I think was around $150, and our little Keurig machine that's a new addition to our little fam, and I think that was like $90. So in total, it was probably less than $1,000, and we don't have any other appliances like a dishwasher or an oven, which kind of helps save, but also has its downsides. Now, obviously, we're missing a really huge part of all of this, which is the tools to build the space, because that can get very expensive. Now, thankfully, my dad did work in carpentry, so he did have a lot of the tools that were used, which honestly, God bless, because we would have spent thousands of dollars in those. But the tools that we didn't have, I ended up spending around $150 for some Ryobi tools, or I asked some other carpentry friends that had special tools if I could borrow them, and thankfully they did. So we ended up saving a lot of money in terms of what we actually used to build this, because you can't cut a piece of wood with your bare hands. And the next biggest cost, which was to be, is the labor. If I haven't already mentioned it, everything else we used this bad boy for. This, and also literally every family member that helped out along the way, which I'm so thankful for, because this wouldn't exist if it weren't for them. But in terms of labor, we ended up spending roughly nothing, because most of this was either done from me or from helps of friends and family. And that is everything that we spent to build this tiny house. Obviously, I probably forgot a few items here or there, but I do know that it was less than about 20 grand total. I actually don't know how much the sum is from what I just said, so editor, please add that here. But considering today's mortgage prices, rent prices, and just honestly breathing air here, I think 20K for having our house and not having any of those additional costs. Honestly, we're very blessed, and I also think that it is a great price for you to be able to have your own space and not have such big liabilities or wait a couple years in order to buy a house. Now, we have been living tiny for over a year, so I do have some comparison prices after you actually build it in terms of how much it costs to live in the tiny house. So before we actually bought our now property where we park it for free, obviously because we own the land, we did rent out a little spot in front of a house that had an RV plug, and they rented it to us for $400 a month. And we had to pay our portion of the internet and also the electric bill, which ended up being $70 for the electric and about $60 for the internet. And specifically here where we live, we're on well and septic, so really convenient that we didn't have to pay for those. So in total for a monthly cost, we were paying roughly $530 in terms of living costs, and we were there for about 6 months. So you can do the math on that. It honestly is not bad at all considering how high rent prices are. And in case you want to put that into perspective, the average American spends roughly $2,025 a month on housing expenses. So even if we were still renting out our spot and not actually had our own land, we would still be saving over $1,500 a month compared to the average person by living in a tiny house. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful and informative if you're looking to build your own tiny house or maybe even invest in one. And if you guys didn't know, we're actually building our second tiny house, which is going to be a shed converted into a tiny house. And so I would love to know if you guys want to see what the comparison is between DIY and actually doing all of the labor yourself for your tiny house and hiring everyone out to do it, because that's kind of what we're doing for the other one. So I think it would be a really fun comparison, but let me know if you guys would like to see that video down in the comments. And as always, I will see you guys next time. Mwah!